on this Monday, which is a grim Monday. Let's face it. Another tragedy in Minnesota. I said on Special Report on Thursday night, Minnesota is an open carry and a concealed carry state. I was very worried about something just like has happened, a second death. But I don't have an opinion on it because I've been around law enforcement long enough to know, and I have covered everything from Rodney King to this latest police-involved or law enforcement-involved shooting to know I don't know, and nobody knows. And we won't know until very skilled investigators review every frame of every video to decide what that sequence of less than 10 seconds involved. I would like Minnesota to begin cooperating with ICE. I would like better explanations of the caution that is going to be observed in the investigation to make sure that it's fair. We do not like police-involved shootings, and you know who likes them the least? Law enforcement. They hate them, but they investigate them fairly and fully. And I have been covering such incidents since Rodney King in L.A. in the 90s. And you just don't know anything. I don't care what your opinion is. You don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows, and it will be a while till anyone knows. Indeed, the officers involved, the last thing on their mind was killing that man. All right, that's what I can tell you right now. But I have seen the reports, and I've put them on my X account, Hugh Hewitt from the Fox Digital team. There is a group operating of anarchists and leftists and radicals, and I don't know if the victim on the weekend was involved in it or not. I just know that they're there and they're operating, and I hope the Bureau brings the bricks down on them. Because I can remember the SDS a little bit. You know, I'm in junior high when they're blowing up buildings. It's a very real problem, and there aren't any problems where the left doesn't decide to make them with ICE. There just isn't. And when you don't have a Jacob Fry or a Tim Walz doing buffoonery things, you don't have this problem. But now the flare has gone up. We've had 2 deaths. 10,000 arrests of criminals, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the president is going to counsel us on. Nothing would surprise me. I just, however, don't know. Now I want to go to the biggest story of all, which is Iran. Trey Yingst of Fox News brought us a couple of updates earlier today. Cut number 1.
Tension remains high across the Middle East as the United States and Iran continue to exchange words about the possibility of war. The U.S. Air Force announced new drills this week in the Middle East as the region waits to see what comes next. More military assets continue to flow to regional countries like Jordan and Qatar. A U.S. official tells Fox News the USS Abraham Lincoln Aircraft Carrier Strike Group has now entered CENTCOM waters, but is not yet considered on station.
On station would mean, and I'm a civilian. I don't know anything other than carriers have 5,000 sailors on them. They're accompanied by destroyer escorts. Probably one of our Ohio-class submarines armed with cruise missiles and a lot of firepower in their, I don't know if they're F-18s or F-35s or a mixture thereof, and I know we got growlers on there. I know a lot about carriers because I've listened to people do. It's a lot of firepower. It's got to be close enough. Don't know that they're within range yet or if they can operate outside of range. We also need our air defenses beefed up there. And by the way, every day that goes by, the massacre in Iran becomes worse. We get more confirmed murders. Here's Trey Yingst again on what the death toll is suspected to be now. Cut number 2.
As the drums of war beat, we are learning new information on the protests earlier this month that sparked the current situation. Time magazine reports the death toll from the demonstrations could be as high as 30,000 people. Iranian officials rejected that number once it came out. Still, we know for a fact that tens of thousands were injured.
I think that's great that we're getting more information, but I don't think we'll ever know entirely how many people were murdered by this regime. But I want you to understand, I heard someone describe it as the worst massacre of civilians since Babi Yar in Poland in 1941, when the Germans just massacred everyone. And it was not the Holocaust, right? That's different from a massacre. It's a death toll that reaches 6 million. It's an organized killing done in secret. It's the Holocaust. You know what it is. And it's more like Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in the years after the Vietnam War when the communists came to power until they were deposed and they murdered 2 million people. They just lined them up and shot them down. They just fired randomly. And now they are going door to door, and it's been relayed by great sources, they being the IRGC and their stooges and the Basij and the other secret police agencies, there are many in Iran, door to door to find wounded people who are smart enough not to go to the hospital, and reports that they're murdering people in the hospital, and reports that the executions are underway. And not just reports, senior regime figures saying this. So it is, in my opinion, not something the United States cannot answer. We are the leader of the free world. We are the major force opposing the alliance of tyrants. And when one of them does something like this, and it's not a nuclear power, all right, so that's a big if. If it's not a nuclear power, and Iran is not, though it does have many ballistic missiles, we got to act. We got to do something. And I think the president will. I don't know when. I think he's got a big window, a wide open window for a couple of months. He doesn't have to act fast. If his chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, says to him, we'd like another couple of weeks to line up A, Y, A, B, and C. And by the way, MBZ, our closest ally other than Israel, little Sparta, United Arab Emirates, they would like a couple more weeks. And by the way, Qatar, which is a special ally of ours, they would like a couple more weeks. And they're actually very upset about this whole thing. And we got to talk to MBS because that's the oil. And if you take out Karg Island and all the other oil, or they blow them up as a false flag operation to blame us for it, there could be a spike in oil prices. I don't know. I can't tell you. But I can tell you I think that, in my opinion, deep, deep damage will be done to the United States deterrent that Donald Trump rebuilt himself with Operation Midnight Hammer and Operation Absolute Resolve after the horrific appeasement years of the locust under Joe Biden. And he's spending what needs to be spent on defense. So happy they are. I think that buildup is going to continue. The necessity of reloading everything that we fired off last June. I think we probably had enough time to do that. I know the Lincoln is fully equipped with all the fuel that they need, and the destroyers have got their Aegis systems. And I'm sure Israel's prepared. By the way, Israel got back the last hostage. Here's Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt at the White House today, cut number 8.
On one more foreign policy point, I will point out, as you all saw, the last remaining body of the hostages, Israeli hostages in Gaza, has been returned. This is a huge foreign policy feat for the President of the United States, for the State of Israel, and frankly, for the whole world. The President made the impossible possible, and so it's great news for the President, for the United States, for our allies, and also for peace in the Middle East. And I understand that more than 20 new additional countries have also signed up to join the newly established Board of Peace with respect to the rebuilding of Gaza, which is another historic accomplishment for this president.
The biggest story in the world for the next 50 years is the restructuring of the Middle East under Donald Trump. It began in his first term with the Abraham Accords and the killing of the murderer Soleimani, and the destruction of ISIS and the execution of al-Baghdadi. And it is continuing in Trump 2 with the deposition of Assad, assisted by Turkey, NATO ally, and Donald Trump's embrace of him, and Operation Midnight Hammer to destroy the obliterate the nuclear program. And it was obliterated. But in hour 3 today, there's only a handful of Americans who are not in the government who actually know what they're talking about. Kareem Sajipour, for example. Michael Duran, who was on last week. I'm going to bring you an hour with Benham Ben Taleblu of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, where he's the senior fellow with the Iran portfolio, to do a comprehensive look-see from start to finish, so don't go anywhere. Before that, I have Dr. Michael Oren, Senator Tom Cotton. I'm also going to do a little antitrust law today because I'm not a big fan of what the Department of Justice got going in the FTC under Biden that we have not yet killed. The effort to, I'm just not a big fan of antitrust law unless you can show me that consumers are being hurt. And I just don't believe Live Nation is an appropriate target. So I'm going to ask Dan Wall to join me on the air next hour. Bethany Mandel will be along. Senator Tom Cotton will be along. Dr. Michael Oren will be along this hour. The other's in hour number 2. I just got a lot to go over. And when we come back, oh, Canada, because I spent most of yesterday writing and this morning editing, and it will appear tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. East Coast time, my Oh Canada column, because I've had it with Mark Carney and my Canadian friends, and God love the Canadians. My daughter-in-law is a Canadian who became a Canadian American, and I love her parents, and I love her siblings, and I love Canada. I love her whole extended family. And Justin Trudeau was a clown, but Mark Carney crossed a big line last week, and it's sinking in, and I want to say more about it after the break here on The Hugh Hewitt Show. I have a very healthy presence on X, and I appreciate those of you who follow me, but it's really rare that one of my long posts, and I will sometimes write an op-ed on there as sort of a first draft or one that I will place over at Fox News the following week. And I did one on Saturday morning or Friday night, I can't remember, about Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's address at Davos. 15 minutes, got a standing ovation, banker to bankers, the bankers' teddy bear picnic at Davos. Donald Trump made Davos great again. I hope no one goes next year. It ought to be banned to let bankers get together and decide that they're running the world. Mark Carney insulted the United States. He just put us in a category with China. And I spent a lot of yesterday writing a lengthier response trying to explain it. But if anyone missed it, he just said basically the middle powers, we need to stand up to the hegemons. That would be China and the United States. Really, he said that after he came back and when he was in Beijing, declaring that he has an alliance, Canada has an alliance with China, apparently forgetting the genocide of the Uyghurs, the repression of Hong Kong, the continued imprisonment of the ailing Jimmy Lai in solitary confinement, the continual threats to Taiwan, their hacking of American utilities, their stealing of intellectual property. It is a Leninist, communist, expansionist regime, which might have just been on the edge of a coup this weekend because they've arrested a bunch of people at the top. They're a mess in China, but Canada doesn't want to be in bed with them. All right, they want to sell crude oil to China. I get that. And President Trump's initial reaction to the announcement by Carney that he had an alliance with China was, well, he should be making trade deals, very low key. Then he went to Davos and basically said, I stand with Greenland and Denmark, and the middle powers should. And Mark Rutte, who's actually a very realistic Secretary General of NATO, who realizes that Canada has no defense that the United States doesn't provide. Greenland doesn't. Denmark doesn't. We are it. We provide the defense for the world against Russia and China. Mark Rutte gave an interview yesterday, cut number 3.
So when President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him. And I don't mind him publishing text messages. And if anyone thinks here, again, that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't. We can't. We need each other. And why do we need each other? I tell you. First of all, because also the US needs NATO. And the US is not only in NATO to prevent a mistake after the First World War, not to re-engage with Europe. And then again, the long arm of history reaching out to the US again in the Second World War, as Churchill famously said in his speech in 1941 in the US Congress. They are also in NATO because for the US to stay safe, and by the way, Arctic region is evidence here, they need a secure Arctic, they need a secure Euro-Atlantic, and they also need a secure Europe. So the US has every interest in NATO as much as Canada and the European NATO allies. But for Europe, if you really want to go it alone, and those of you who are planning for that, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. You will lose then, in that scenario, you would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella. Good luck.
Good luck, and he didn't stop there. More Mark Rutte. Again, he is not from Denmark. He's from the Netherlands, but he's the Secretary General now of NATO, and he's not a conservative. He's a centrist. Cut number 4.
General, in the first work stream, how can we best, as NATO, collectively take the defense of the Arctic forward? And indeed, there is also an issue, I think, when the Arctic becomes more of an issue, and President Trump, by the way, and I will defend him now and then this afternoon just to irritate you. No, because I really feel that he deserves some defense. He was the one, during Trump 45, who already said there is an issue with Arctic security. And again, he did so when he came back into office in January. And I think he's right. There is an issue with the Arctic region. There is an issue of collective security because these sea lanes are opening up. And because the Chinese and the Russians are more and more active. China, of course, not bordering on the Arctic, but as you know, very much being involved there together with the Russians. So Clearly, we have to address that, and that means that when it comes to this question of capabilities, we will see in NATO how we tackle this. We have a well-established process of capability targeting. So now we will look into, within the system of the capability targets, the Danes have made this point. Prime Minister Frederiksen visited me on Friday. She very much stressed that point rightly. I think others are stressing that point. So we now look into how we can best do that, taking that issue forward, that the capabilities we need also to defend the Arctic are also step by step becoming part of the overall capability targeting process.
Good for him. Now, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent also was at Davos last week, and he heard Prime Minister Carney insult the United States and categorize us as a hegemon with China. He heard all that talk about alliance. He was on with Jonathan Karl yesterday, cut number 9.
Prime Minister Carney went to China, came back, dropped some industry-specific tariffs on Chinese goods, and we have a highly integrated market with Canada, sometimes in autos, which he dropped the EV tariff, I believe, from 100% to 6%. Goods can cross the border during the manufacturing process 6 times, and we can't let Canada become an opening that the Chinese pour their cheap goods into the U.S. We have a USMCA agreement, but based on that, which is going to be renegotiated this summer, and I'm not sure what Prime Minister Carney is doing here, other than trying to virtue signal to his globalist friends at Davos. I don't think he's doing the best job for the Canadian people.
He certainly isn't. And apparently he noticed that a lot of Americans, including one named Trump, but a lot of Americans took umbrage at his arrogant, absolutely delusional speech in Davos. So he gave a press conference yesterday. Remember, 2 weeks ago, alliance with China. Last week, just insult the United States for 15 minutes and then get a standing ovation from the bankers. Yesterday, Mark Carney, cut number 10.
How are you responding to Trump's threats of 100% tariffs?
Well, the first thing is that Canada respects our engagements, our commitments. Il y a des engagements dans l'ACM. We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy. What we've done with China is to rectify some issues that developed in the last couple of years. In many respects, we're going, to use the expression, back to the future with respect to EVs, with respect to agriculture, with respect to fish products and other food products, but with additional protections. So, for example, back in 2023, we didn't have a cap on the number of EVs. We didn't have a requirement for a large proportion of those EVs to be affordable, highly affordable EVs for Canadians. So it's entirely consistent with CUSMA, with our obligations, which we very much respect under CUSMA and will continue to work that way forward.
Not an apology, not an alliance, backpedaling, but not yet fully aware of the damage he has done to the bilateral relations with the United States, which actually protects Canada 24/7, 365. Their military totals 68,000 people. They have 4 submarines, right? They are not an independent middle power. They are not. They spend less than 2% of their GDP. We love them. But really, you can't talk trash about the United States at Davos. We know the tragedy that occurred this weekend. Another dead protester in Minneapolis. I've already said, and I will say it again, that I don't know what happened. I have no opinion on what happened as to whether or not it's justified use of force. I've seen the videos. You can't tell anything from the video. I covered law enforcement-involved shootings since 1990 and encounters, and I know that the investigation into it will be full, fair, and complete. And I have no opinion on it until then. But I do have an opinion on what Tim Walz and Jacob Frey ought to be doing, the governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis, which is to order police to cooperate with federal law enforcement and to stop this madness. Carolyn Levitt, White House press conference, cut number 5.
has confidence and trust in Secretary Noem. To the second question, I would point you back to what I said earlier. If Governor Walz and Mayor Frey implement these common sense cooperative measures, CBP will no longer be needed to support ICE on the ground in Minnesota. ICE and local law enforcement will peacefully work together, as they are effectively doing in so many other states and jurisdictions, to remove violent criminals from American neighborhoods across the country.
All right. And then let's go more. Carolyn Levitt, cut number 6.
In Minnesota. Number 1, Governor Walz, Mayor Frey, and all Democrat leaders should turn over all criminal illegal aliens currently incarcerated in their prisons and jails to federal authorities, along with any illegal aliens with active warrants or known criminal histories for immediate deportation. Number 2, state and local law enforcement must agree to turn over all illegal aliens who are arrested by local police. And then thirdly, local police must assist federal law enforcement in apprehending and detaining illegal aliens who are wanted for crimes, especially violent crimes. If Governor Walz and Mayor Frey implement these common sense cooperative measures that, I will add, have already been implemented in nearly every single other state across the country, Customs and Border Patrol will not be needed to support ICE on the ground in Minnesota. ICE and local law enforcement can peacefully work together, as they are effectively doing in so many other states and jurisdictions. Additionally, President Trump is calling on the United States Congress to immediately pass legislation ending sanctuary cities once and for all. American cities should be safe sanctuaries for law-abiding citizens only, not for dangerous illegal alien criminals who broke our nation's laws and do not belong here. We hope Governor Walz will do the right thing and continue to work with President Trump to keep the American people safe following their call this morning.
One more cut from Press Secretary Levitt, cut number 7.
I would just add on this level of cooperation a few statistics that I think are very important. 7 of the top 10 safest cities in the United States cooperate with ICE. And we've seen historic turnaround in safety in cities that have chosen to cooperate with ICE, that are not just led by Republicans, but also look right here in Washington, D.C. We had a great level of cooperation with Mayor Bowser and the local government, and we have been able to remove thousands of illegal aliens from the District of Columbia, where you all live, so you can thank President Trump for that. The murder rate in Washington, D.C. has plummeted as a result. There were no riots, there were no protests, nobody was tragically killed as a result of that level of cooperation between federal and local authorities. And again, that's all the president is asking for in Minnesota. It's totally
Now, is that cooperation happening? Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara was on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan yesterday, cut number 11.
Were you ever ordered to stand down? Have police been told not to protect ICE?
It is deeply disappointing to have anyone question and disparage the hard work of the men and women of the Minneapolis Police Department. There are 600 police officers that are left here after the destruction of the city in 2020, and they are doing an incredible job. About a dozen of our cops have been injured responding to a lot of the chaos that has resulted on the streets. Our officers respond every time there's a threat to someone's life, to public safety, or destruction in the city. And it doesn't matter whether it's because ICE is there or someone from the community is there. We are doing everything that we can to manage this chaos, but there's only 600 cops here, and there's thousands of immigration agents here.
Right.
All right, so he didn't answer that. I don't know if you noticed that. He did not answer that. Can we go just to the beginning of it? Here's the question.
Were you ever ordered to stand down? Have police been told?
All right, so that's a pretty easy yes or no. He did not come up with a yes or no, which means to me that it should have been asked a second time. I don't know if it was. I don't watch Margaret. I don't watch the Sunday shows anymore. I don't know that anyone does. But I do get the clips. I don't know if she followed up, but the follow-up should be, well, that's good. I'm glad that you're a good police department. You're proud of your officers. Did you get an order to stand down? Because that is what many people in the Twin Cities believe. Joined now by Michael Oren, former ambassador from Israel to the United States. Dr. Oren is the go-to guy on things in Israel. And I want to begin by saying I think everyone in the audience shares the relief that all of Israel must share, Dr. Orrin, with the return of the last hostage body. And what a horrific chapter to have closed, but I'm glad that it closed today. I don't know what the emotional reaction is in Israel, but relief has got to be part of it.
Well, look, it's the first time in 2.5 years, Hugh, that I'm not wearing the yellow ribbon pin. And I didn't know if I was ever going to take it off of my lapel, but it just came off today, several hours ago. And I must say, our feelings are divided. Part of us are sharing the sorrow of the Gavili family, whose son was killed performing heroically
Oh, we froze there for a second. I don't know what happened, but we will try and get him back up here. I think he hit the mute button. Oh, you're back, Doctor.
I did.
Go ahead.
Back. Okay. I don't know if you heard from the beginning. I said that for the first time in 2.5 years, I've taken off the yellow ribbon from my lapel.
Yes.
And I didn't know if I was ever going to take that off, right? It just took it off just a few hours ago. So you're hearing a clean lapel for the first time in 2.5 years. I think we're very divided in our feelings. One half of us are share the sorrow of the Gavili family over the loss of their son, Ron Gavili, who died heroically in the line of action on in October 7th, 2023. We share in the relief of the family in receiving his remains for proper burial in the state of Israel. And we are filled with hope for the future now that all those hostages have been returned living and deceased, and we can begin to rebuild and take on the next chapter. And as you see, that next chapter is coming very, very rapidly, it seems.
Yeah, well, let's turn to that. I'm going to have Behnam Ben Talib Blue for the last hour of today's program talking about Iran. I think we're on the brink of the United States initiating kinetic activity because it would be a dent in deterrence if we don't. How do you see the situation? Does the United States go alone? Does it go with Israel? Does it follow Israel like it did in June of last year?
Well, it's like that answer on the SATs. It's D, all of the above.
Okay.
One of three things going to happen. Either the United States goes it alone, and I can't imagine that the president has moved so many massive assets to the Middle East region and is not going to use them. You take out a pistol and don't use it, it projects weakness and not strength, and you become basically a Barack Obama not enforcing a red line. God forbid. Secondly, does Israel join? And from my sources in Israel tell me that Israel very much wants to join, wants to be part of this, and we can bring to bear immense military power with our Air Force and other assets we have in the region. And then thirdly, the third option is that maybe there is a coup within the Iranian leadership, that they ditch the supreme leader and they cut a deal. They cut a deal which is sort of Venezuela-like. The regime will survive, but it won't be the same regime. It will not be anti-Western. It'll be pro-Western, and the oil will flow not to China but to the United States, and they will stop supporting terrorists around the world and cease seeking our destruction. And that would be a game changer. It wouldn't be the best outcome for the people of Iran, I must say, but it would be certainly better for the people of the Middle East generally.
Now, you have founded the Israel Advocacy Group, and the Israel Advocacy Group studies things from the perspective of the Jewish state. Do you expect if the United States initiates a strike as punishment, just punishment for the slaughter of 30,000 of their own citizens and the ongoing incarceration, probably torture and murder of others, that whether or not you want to get involved, Iran will hit Israel? So you have to get in a first punch?
Well, I don't know if we'll preempt it, but I would say we certainly have a casus belli. Iran has been trying to destroy Israel now since the inception of the Islamic Republic in 1979. It's responsible for the deaths of countless thousands of Israelis and Jews around the world, not just Israelis, blowing up synagogues and Jewish community centers in South America, for example, in Argentina. That's just one example. Precipitating wars. Iran was behind October 7th. It trained and funded Hamas and Hezbollah. We don't have to look for a reason to go to war against Iran. But it would help if Iran would do as Dirty Harry used to say, and I know you know what I mean. Go ahead, pull the trigger and make my day. And all we need is one missile fired, and we'll take it down, and we'll respond. And we have to prepare, though. We have to prepare for the fact that it won't be just Iran firing ballistic missiles at us. We assume that they have about 1,500 of these very large ballistic missiles. They carry between 200 and 250 pounds of TNT that knocks down not just a building, but a neighborhood. And we're going to have to get to those rocket launchers as soon as possible. But we'll also be targeted by the Houthis once again, maybe by Hezbollah, certainly by the Syrian and Iraqi pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria. So we have to be prepared for that type of combat again. And I think that Israel now will be prepared to deliver a knockout blow.
Now, Dr. Orn, I heard over the weekend that Turkey has supplied Syria's new regime with air defenses that were not there in June of last year. Does Israel still have a clear sky all the way to Iran if it needs it?
Oh, yes, I do. It does. Listen, the Russians were there. We had a clear sky. And the Russians had seemingly or purportedly the most advanced anti-aircraft systems in the world, the S-300. Because they know if they fire our planes, we're going to fire back. We're going to destroy those systems and then go try to sell them to people around the world. So I don't think Turkey's going to risk that. Even if they have moved those anti-aircraft systems into Syria, they're not going to fire at our planes.
And is there a preparation that if this goes off, I think it has to happen, or President Trump will have dented the deterrence he rebuilt. If it does go off, and I expect that it will at some point before the middle of March, what's the high end? I mean, those are a lot of missiles with a lot of TNT on them. Do people have any idea what's coming at Israel?
Yeah, they do, certainly, because we had a not a dry run. We had a dress rehearsal in June last year, and I was under fire from those rockets. It was unpleasant. You know, we have bomb shelters in our houses that can withstand a hit by a Hezbollah rocket or a Hamas rocket. But the rockets that Iran fired us were killing people in those safe rooms. Very, very powerful explosives. So we have to brace ourselves for that. And listen, the people of Israel, as you know, we're indomitable, we're strong, and we will do this. This is an opportunity that comes about, I can say maybe, I want to say a century, but I almost want to say a millennium. That to free the Jewish state from an enemy that seeks our destruction, not our defeat. You know, it's extremely rare in history for one side in a conflict to seek to destroy entirely the other side. You know, our parents fought against Germany and Japan. They didn't want to destroy Germany and Japan, just change their government. It's extremely rare, and this is our chance to be free of it.
Ambassador Michael Oren, founder of the Israel Advocacy Group, thank you for joining me. Follow him on X at Dr. Michael Oren, Dr. Michael Oren. Coming up, I'm going to have a great hour for you. Senator Cotton will be here. Bethany Mandel's coming along. And I'm going to open up with Dan Wall, who's the Executive Vice President of Live Nation, because Antitrust Department of Justice has lost its mind again, and they're investigating Live Nation, which is just a successful company. And so I hate the waste of talent and treasure. I don't want you to waste your talent and treasure either. I don't want you to pay too much for your cell phone service, which is why I'm proud to have as a sponsor Consumer Cellular. Call 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454, or go to consumercellular.com/Hugh. Whether you call or go online, remember my code is Hugh. If you sign up with Consumer Cellular, the Hugh code gets you a second month of service free. But everyone ought to check at least once a year on what you're paying for your cell phone service and what you can save by moving over to Consumer Cellular. It takes about 20 minutes to switch. Keep your number, keep your contacts, keep going like nothing happened. They use the same towers as does Big Cellular, but their plans are better. They're cheaper. They're better for you. You get the same great service, but at great savings. And if you're over 50, if you're 50 years or older, you can have 2 lines of unlimited data for $60 a month. You and your spouse, you and your friend, 2 lines, $60 a month if you're both over 50. So please, 1-800-411-4454. And don't forget, Hugh is my code. You can also get it automatically by going consumercellular.com/Hugh. They'll know you're asking for it, but bring it up anyway. With one touch of a button, you'll be talking to a live human being here in America. That's where all their customer service is based, right here. You'll love them. I'm in the Relief Factor studio, West. I got to take it. Had a very interesting weekend. Did the Implacable Hill on Saturday, which I don't normally do, up and down it and up it again, with our out-of-town friend, Jim, because Jim Sweet needed to do that. And to my friends in Philadelphia listening on WNTP, you know Jim, and great lawyer. about my age plus a few, and he did not pause. We climbed that implacable hill and came down, and we were out rambling around this morning. We had a memorial service for Bud the contractor's beautiful wife, Linda, and he came because he was Bud the contractor's unfortunate roommate at Wheaton. I mean, someone had to live with Bud, and it's Jim. But we went out there and we got our miles in, and then Betsy and I had to run up and down the 405 yesterday. So a lot of time not doing what I normally do on a weekend, but that means Relief Factor is more necessary than ever. There, if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, there are the 4 pills, the 4 supplements. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. And you can see, and you can hear if you're listening on the Salem Radio Network, one of our great affiliates, just took it. That's how easy it is. Do it every day. You'll feel great. You'll get the hours, you'll get the miles in, the exercise in that you want. But I do want to tell you the starter pack is $19.95. All right? That's less than $1 a day for 3 weeks. And they get the levels of the supplements up in your body by taking 3 packets a day for the first week, 2 packets a day for the second week, and then you're on the 1 packet a day program. That's a starter pack. Look for it when you call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800-4RELIEF, or go to their website, relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. But those of you who've been with me since I started this program in July of 2000 know I spent a year at the Department of Justice with William Prince Smith and Ed Meese before going to the White House counsel's office, and I used to hurry past the antitrust division. I didn't want to go near it because abandon hope, all ye who enter there. I had done the AT&T connection case for the D.C. Circuit judges that I was clerking for, and I just didn't like antitrust. I took it, and for some reason, they're still alive. And I have invited Dan Wall, the Live Nation Executive Vice President, to join me because one of the dumbest antitrust actions that Joe Biden filed was against Live Nation, and I just wanted to explain to people and have Dan join me to do it why it's so dumb to go after successful companies. Dan, nice to meet you. I want to make it clear you're not my sponsor. You're not my client. I have never done any business for Live Nation. I've always paid full freight for when I go for my Browns season tickets and for my concerts and baseball games. But I don't like the government suing you. How did this get started?
Well, thanks for having me, Hugh. And first of all, the first thing I've learned is that we were both in the same building at the Justice Department at the same time. So I was actually one of the lawyers that was prosecuting the antitrust case against AT&T.
Oh, I ran past you guys. I was afraid a hand would come out and grab the special assistant and drag me in there. I'd never get out.
Well, yeah, it took a while to get out. But thanks for bringing this up because it is a very unusual antitrust case. I've got to say, as somebody who practiced antitrust law since 1980, the Biden administration's suite of antitrust cases were all pretty crazy. But this one in particular, I think, was really largely a political stunt. It is not a case that was ever going to do anything for fans to lower the price of any ticket, lower the price of any fee, get them more shows, increase the quality, anything like that. But it was conceived as a way to perhaps reach out to the Swifties and do something that would be politically popular, given the Biden sort of ethic that we saw, where antitrust became fundamentally anti-corporate. It wasn't about protecting the competitive process. It was about going after big corporations because big corporations were seen as a problem in themselves. And if that's what you're starting with, you're probably going to end up with a poor case, and that's what they've ended up with.
Well, Dan, explain to people, let's first give them the data. Live Nation's the largest live entertainment company in the world. And they put on events all over the place, and they manage tickets, and they manage Ticketmaster. They're good for fans who want to go to games. They revolutionize the industry. And so that's why I like it, because I'm a Brown season ticket holder. If I want to dump my tickets because I can't go, I can sell them on Live Nation and through Ticketmaster. And it's the market. It's just the market. What doesn't the Biden administration, and why is the Trump administration continuing a Biden administration PR stunt?
I'm not quite sure what the answer is to the second question, but you have to remember that the Biden administration was unique and that they were the one antitrust administration we've had in decades that decided that our holy of holies, the consumer welfare standard, was wrong. And that it didn't need to be followed. And you didn't actually need to show harm to the consumer in order to bring an antitrust case. They had this amorphous concept that they called the competitive process, which when you looked at it seemed to be, is this hurting your competitors? And if it is, then maybe it's an antitrust violation. But ever since Ronald Reagan became president, we haven't thought that way. And both Democratic and Republican presidents followed suit with that. We had one of these rare areas of bipartisan consensus, but they blew it up. They just completely blew it up. And then here we are. We're now at the end game of this case, and they are weeks away from possibly having to try a case that is exceptionally weak.
So fill us in a little bit on the detail. I got a lot of lawyers listening. In fact, I got a buddy in town who was with Drinker forever as our managing partner, and we were talking about antitrust, and I will talk more about antitrust with him. Where do you go to trial on this, and who's representing you? Which firm is representing you at trial?
The case will be tried in New York City, and we are represented primarily by Latham and Watkins, but also by Cravath, Swin, and Moore.
Oh, bring in the Marines and the Special Services. Okay, that's good.
You cannot even imagine how many lawyers are working on this, Hugh, for both sides, particularly because there's a number of states that are plaintiffs as well, and the cumulative lawyer load is astonishing. But let me just ask to kind of give you the big picture here. So you have to begin with that this is a monopolization case. The Jonathan Cantor rhetoric when he filed it was this is a company that had mutual reinforcing monopolies. And so it is quite something that here we are at the end, and the case is on the brink of being dismissed because the government cannot prove any of the monopolies. The reason it can't is because if you actually say ticketing, where people assume that Ticketmaster is a monopoly, but if you actually think about all of the big accounts, the stadiums and the arenas and the big theaters and amphitheaters that Ticketmaster and its rivals go after, its market share is actually under 50%. And that's not my number. That's the number of the government's expert when you count all of the business. So what they're trying to do instead is not count all the business. They've cherry-picked a market of essentially our best customers, the part of the market that seems to like us the most. Odd place to put a monopolization case, and they're saying we have a high market share of that. We're going to find out if that works. We had a hearing on Friday, and the judge, I think it's fair to say, was skeptical of it, but he's a very studious judge. He's going to think about it very hard, and we'll see if they can even get past this threshold about monopoly power.
I've always believed when I took antitrust at the University of Michigan 1,000 years ago. The rule was, and it was one of the experts who had the case book, was if you had a good case, you wanted a smart judge in antitrust. And Lena Khan and the whole gang that rolled in, they were trying to change the world. They're Cape Crusaders in an imaginary world of antitrust that never existed and shouldn't exist. Have you got a smart judge? Well, you can't say he's not a smart judge, but is your judge experienced with antitrust?
Oh, he is. He's a former Supreme Court clerk. He's extremely smart.
Oh, good.
So we are blessed with a smart judge. That's for sure.
Now, let me ask, because people think so they're getting sued. It's not a big deal. There are bad impacts from bad antitrust suits. The AT&T after effects went on for years when I was on the D.C. Circuit, connection fees, all that stuff. There is a downside for the consumer in suing Live Nation. Would you explain it to people?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think the probably the biggest thing there is that the stated object of this entire enterprise is to try to break up Live Nation and Ticketmaster. We came together by a merger that went through the government review process in 2009, 2010. The merger has been a great success for consumers, largely because it put Ticketmaster, the ticketing company, under the control and under the incentives of an artist-focused concert promoter, where the entire incentive system of the company is to try to put on as many shows as possible, sell as many tickets as possible, get as many people out to those shows as possible, and do it all efficiently. Now, the government wants to break that up. And why? Because of this fundamentally anti-corporate bent that was part of the Biden administration. All of these big antitrust cases that they brought were against vertically integrated companies. They hated vertical integration. They actually revived merger guidelines about vertical mergers that nobody had taken very seriously for many, many years. So it really is a sort of structural objection to the way that a lot of large companies are organized.
Now, this is not a personal attack on anyone at Justice. It's an observation. This is just business. The antitrust division should have been shuttered a long time ago, given the rise of the new competitive order brought about by the Internet of Things. Do you think it just is the momentum of a lawsuit going forward and career lawyers at DOJ, they got a ball to play with like a cat and a kitten with a ball of yarn?
Oh, I think it's always the case that once something starts within any government organization, there's sort of this bureaucratic momentum that keeps it going. But Hugh, I'll push back with you a little bit there on the question of whether we need the antitrust laws. I think we need them for a lot of things. But what most Republican administrations for sure have always been careful to remember is that it has to be used very sparingly as a scalpel. It is not a tool for restructuring the world in some image that you prefer. It's not nation building. It's not social engineering. And this case, the way the Biden administration conceived it, was all of that and more.
Well, I hope you get SJ and then it goes up very quickly to the Second Circuit, because I would love for DOJ to get guidance on abandoning the anti-corporate slant. Would you hope for that? Yeah, obviously, the government will appeal it if you get SJ, but would you argue that this is the ideal time to get that set in stone out of the Second Circuit?
Or the Supreme Court if necessary. One thing, I'm an antitrust professor as well, and what we got from the Biden administration was so aberrant that there was actually a lot of discussion among professors as to whether we should even teach it. There's not even a chance that it would be accepted by a majority of today's Supreme Court. So yes,
Lita Khan and the Cape Crusaders of the Biden era, they can't be far enough away from power soon enough. Dan Wall, good luck this week and next, and I'll check back in because it's actually one of those cases that touches Americans' consumers, and they all know Live Nation, and they all applaud having easy access to the venues they want to go to and finding out pricing that's transparent and obvious. Dan Wall, thank you very much. Just sent a text to a mutual friend of Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican of Arkansas, John Hinderaker, one of the guys at Powerline, and I said to him, Senator, that I don't have anything to say about Minnesota except the last thing law enforcement wants is a law enforcement officer involved shooting, and that I don't know what happened, and I'm sure it will be completely investigated, but it sure would be good if Governor Walz and Mayor Frey worked with the federal government pursuant to the Supremacy Clause. You got anything to add to that?
No, Hugh, I think it's all very well said. The deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy were regrettable tragedies, but they were avoidable as well and could have been avoided. And such incidents can be avoided in the future if state and local officials will simply cooperate with federal law enforcement, or at least not actively obstruct them and encourage civilians to interfere as well. See, we've had ICE and Homeland Security investigation arrests in Arkansas. They've had many, many more in Texas and Georgia and Florida than what's occurred in Minnesota. None of those have been in the news because you don't have state and local officials in those states agitating against ICE. So I was pleased to see the president today said he had a constructive call with Tim Walz. Hopefully that means that Minnesota officials will again start cooperating, or at least not actively obstructing and encouraging civilians to interfere with and harass federal law enforcement officers.
Well, thank you for that, Senator, and we will see. Now, coming up next hour, I have from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Ben and Ben Taliblu, their senior fellow and head of their Iranian program there, talking about what appears to be an imminent collision between the United States and Iran. If such a kinetic strike is ordered by the president, what do you think the objective of it ought to be, Senator?
Well, first off, I want to be clear that I'm not prejudging or saying anything like that might happen. I think the world widely knows the position of our aircraft carriers, and one is getting a lot closer to the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman than it once was. But I think the objective of U.S. policy right now in this moment, given the massive protests and the massacres of those protesters, should be, one, anything that can help the protesters and reduce the violence against them, anything that can put more pressures on the Ayatollahs. And that's not just, for instance, military action. We can ramp up our enforcement of sanctions. Iran has already been suffering badly from increased sanctions enforcement over the last year. We can do more. You've seen us interdict the so-called ghost vessels coming out of Venezuela. France interdicted one from Russia just last week. With Venezuela now in, let's say, more compliant hands, if not necessarily friendly hands, we can put more of those assets perhaps against Iran's black market oil exports. So we still have many options that will allow us to keep the pressure on the Ayatollahs.
Now, Senator, I have been emphasizing to everyone, it's not a risk-free thing. The Lincoln is a target. There are 5,000 sailors on that. The Iranians are not without capabilities that are enormous. But do you fear Hezbollah inside of the United States or another Iranian-backed operative acting after any kinetic activity?
Well, Hugh, I think we need to be mindful that Hezbollah has been a cat's paw of Iran for decades, and they've had an active policy of trying to infiltrate the West. They've carried out terrorist attacks outside of Iran in the Middle East. And that's one reason why Maduro was so uniquely dangerous in Latin America. It wasn't just drug trafficking with the arms of the government. He was inviting Hezbollah and Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps into our backyard. I know that the administration is being mindful of that, Department of Justice and Homeland Security, about threats inside of the United States, irrespective of whether or not there might be additional military action soon against Iran, something they take very seriously and work against every day.
Now, Senator, I want to switch to Canada, of all things. To go from Iran to Canada is quite the neck turn. But Prime Minister Carney went to China and announced an alliance with the Chinese Communist Party, which just stunned me. Then he went to Davos and basically insulted the president and the United States for 15 minutes by putting us in a category with China as a hegemon and ignoring. Now, I know 158 Canadians died in Afghanistan where you served, and I don't know if they were in Iraq or not. I know they were our ally in the Korean War, and they are friends, and we are friendly with Canada. But what did you make of the Carney Davos speech and his announcement of a, quote, alliance with China?
Well, Hugh, like you, I don't have a lot of time for Mark Carney sucking up the Chinese communists and then ridiculing and insulting the United States and our president. It's fine. Look, every nation has a right to pursue its interests. And if Mark Carney and Canadians disagree with this, that, or the other United States policy, it's fine to oppose that. I think it's more constructive to have a frank and candid conversation directly with the president or with Secretary Rubio than to go and grandstand and peacock in Davos. But what's truly appalling is having done that, as you said, just days after sucking up to the Chinese communist dictator Xi Jinping and acting as somehow communist China is more closely aligned with Canada than the United States. Again, it's fine for any foreign leader, foreign country to be opposed to this, that, or the other American policy, but to suck up to Xi Jinping while you peacock at Davos, I think is repellent.
Well, I am more exercised about this than I am when evildoers do evil things because they're supposed to be our friends. They are our friends. Most Canadians are our friends. And my daughter-in-law is a Canadian American, for goodness sake, and her whole family are my good friends. And I just think, what in the world? He went to Davos and preached human rights after shaking the very bloody hand of Xi Jinping, the Uyghur genocide, the Hong Kong repression. Jimmy Lai is in jail. Taiwan is threatened. It was like a banker's teddy bear picnic in Davos. I hope you never go.
Well, I've never been yet, Hugh. I'm glad that President Trump has gone now a couple times at least and explained exactly to all of those bureaucrats why the United States is the way we are and what course of action we're taking. I will say I do think there's more than a small dose of domestic politics in Canada with Mark Carney. As you suggested, Mark Carney is not a career politician. He's a longtime banker. He kind of stumbled backwards into the premiership after Justin Trudeau ran aground. And I think he views this as good domestic politics for him. And that his base of voters, which is kind of like the far left in America, is more sympathetic and supportive of a communist dictator in China than they are of Donald Trump.
And the last question, Senator Collins, your colleague, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, chairwoman of Appropriations, got all of them done or ready to go. Do you expect the Senate will keep the government open by passing these appropriations bills?
Well, I certainly hope so, Hugh, and that was the expectation until 2 or 3 days ago during the most recent shooting in Minnesota. Now the Democrats are saying they're going to shut down not just ICE, Hugh, but FEMA and TSA after a major winter storm, and other departments like the Department of Defense and the Transportation Department, because they do not want to arrest and deport criminal illegal aliens. That doesn't seem to me to be a tenable position, Hugh. And even Patty Murray, the senior Democratic counterpart to Susan Collins on the Appropriations Committee, said just a few days ago, if we shut down the government, it won't do anything to stop what ICE is doing in Minnesota. She acknowledged that the action of shutting down the government would not stop anything that they're condemning right now. Yet apparently they may do so anyway. I hope not.
Well, Chuck Schumer is not the brightest bulb in the light of the Senate. Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you, Senator. Good luck this week. I want to bring you the news from the markets today. The Dow closed up 0.64%. The S&P was up 0.5%. The Nasdaq was up 0.43%. The price of gold has crossed $5,000, which is extraordinary. It is trading currently at $5,015 an ounce. Last year, I didn't buy it this January. Did not buy it this January. I don't know what to make of that, because I bought it last year at $2,700 like I do every January, but did not make the call to my gold dealer this year because I just don't know what to make of that. And as you get older, you got to become more cautious in your investing, and I don't want to buy an asset that might be a temporarily surge, but I don't give financial advice here. You go out and buy it if you want. The U.S. 10-year Treasury went up by 1/32, so it's at 4.218. But what really is interested to me is I'm looking for the price of crude oil, which went down today to $60.76 a barrel. And I don't know that the market's really worried about Iranian oil. I think the market knows that Venezuelan oil is now going to come online in a legitimate way with increasing production as the transition from the dictator Maduro to free and fair elections and a representative government and the end of the secret police state is underway. It's a big win for Donald Trump. I do not believe hitting Karg Island or hitting the oil terminals. Well, I wouldn't be going to work if I was an Iranian on the oil island. I certainly wouldn't want to be the repairman at an IRGC base near you. And believe me, the United States knows where they are. They know where the Besiege offices are. They know where Khomeini is. They might not want to kill Khomeini because he's such a terrible, terrible leader, especially if we're going to be in a prolonged... I can't imagine we're in for a prolonged... We're not going to put boots on the ground in Iran. We're not going to... I don't even know if we're going to do anything in Iran. It just might be all cyber. Might just take all their money, disintermediate their money. But I want to go... I'm going to talk to Bethany Mandel after the break. I hope Bethany's here because I want to get reactions to the Minnesota situation. What do I hear the most? People hate having civilians shot by law enforcement. They hate it. And Donald Trump understands that. And even though there is not one... I happen to have the advantage of actually knowing police officers and federal agents and Department of Homeland Security people. And especially, I was hoping to see a police officer of long acquaintance, but Mark was not at the memorial service for Bud the contractor's wonderful wife, Linda, because I wanted to talk to him about this because I want to talk to real law enforcement. Maybe Detective Tom will call for the third segment for a brief comment. I know from every law enforcement official, state, local, federal, that I have ever met, they never want to shoot anybody. It is not anything anybody wants to go to, because it's traumatic for you, especially if the individual is killed, even if it's justifiable force. And I don't have an opinion. And anyone who has an opinion, and this goes for left, right, and center, you don't know enough to have an opinion. You don't know enough. I've been telling people for a week, Minnesota is an open carry and a closed, concealed carry state. It's a shall issue state. There are lots and lots and lots of guns in Minnesota, just like they are in every northern state that does hunting, and pistols can be carried. I used to do an event with Dwayne, Hugh Hewitt on ice, Hugh Hewitt on ice twice, Hugh Hewitt on ice thrice, Hugh Hewitt, Roman numeral 4. We would go every year, and then we would go to the state fair. I made 2 trips. And one buddy, he ran the Minnesota Handgun rights group would always show up with a couple of 45s on his belt, and he'd show them to me. That's great. I know that. I trust you. But this was inevitable. I want you to go to my timeline at X and find the Fox digital investigation. The left, the radical left, has turned out in force. They want this. All right? They want what is happening. And I do not know what is the best policy here, and I do not presume to give advice on this. I don't know whether or not ICE ought to de-escalate, or whether or not, if you do, does that not just encourage additional crime? And it is a crime to interfere with federal investigations. And I realize people get all worked up about this, but it's not anything Donald Trump wants, or J.D. Vance wants, or Kristi Noem, or anyone at ICE or the Border Patrol or Customs. Nobody wants it, and it doesn't have to happen. All you have to do is cooperate with ICE, but we also don't want criminal illegal aliens in the country. Honor the detainers. I'm going to find out what Bethany Mandel says after the break, because Bethany is the most level-headed guest of the week, and a mom. You can read her over at themomwars.substack.com. Today is the first day since 2014 that an Israeli hostage has not been held in Gaza, living or dead. There has been a hostage in Gaza since 2014. I'm joined by Bethany Mandel, who has been, throughout the last 2.5 years, always on a voice for the hostages and their families and their loved ones. And Bethany, having done that much with those families, how does today feel?
It feels like October 8th. It finally feels like October 8th. It in a lot of ways, it has felt like Americans and, Israelis and Jews and anyone with a conscience has been holding their breath, waiting for closure. And I think we finally got it today.
So I don't know if you worked with the Ron Gavili family at all. I think he was murdered on October 7th, right? And then they took the body. It just underscores what a ghastly group of people Hamas terrorists are.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was taken actually from it was an incredible story. He was a police officer and he heard what was going on, and he was waiting on a surgery for his broken shoulder, and he ran and threw on his uniform and grabbed his gun, and his father said, "What are you doing? You can't use your shoulder." And he said, "Well, I have another one and I have a gun." And he ran down and he saved people and protected people in Kibbutz Alumim, and was killed in the line of duty, and his body was captured.
Now, there are impromptu gatherings across the Jewish state today, marking the fact it's not only his return, but it's been 12 years since Hamas didn't have a hostage, living or dead. Doesn't that tell us everything we need to know about Iran? Because they're the ones who fund Hamas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's truly ghastly. And for so many years, people had forgotten about the plight of two hostages that were being held there. And they were held there for over 10 years, and they were living. And they were returned in one of the more recent hostage deals. But it's really an incredible day, and it feels like closure for that family. I know that this isn't the ending that they wanted or deserved, but they deserved an ending, and they got it today.
Now, what do you make? What is the reaction in Israel to the massacre of 30,000 people? It should be around the world. This regime is as evil as anyone could have imagined. That's my reaction. What is the reaction in Israel?
Israelis are horrified and frustrated that the world, was screaming about these numbers that were fed to the world by Hamas. Everyone took those as gospel, but are silent on this massacre that there's far more evidence of. It is possible for the Iranian people to overthrow this regime, but eyes have to stay on them, and they have to feel like the world has their back. And I don't think that they necessarily should feel that way right now, and they deserve to.
I don't know what President Trump is thinking. That's part of his strategic deterrence, but we will find out. Now, Bethany, you're a normal, ordinary Maryland mom of 6. And your opinion matters a lot on what you see in Minnesota and how you're reacting to it. So tell me what that is.
So I think I'm pretty normal in a lot of ways, but I pay more attention than 99% of people because, sometimes I'm on Hugh Hewitt show and he asks me questions like this and I have to be prepared. If I were a normal mom looking at Instagram, I would be horrified. I would think that there is it's open season on American citizens and on, upright immigrants in places like Minnesota. But because I'm paying more than a little bit of attention, I know that the officials in Minnesota, Tim Walz and James Frey, the mayor, are fomenting a lot of unrest, and they've basically martyred two people at this point, Renee Good and the man that was shot yesterday. And I'm not prepared enough to remember his name, but they're fomenting a lot of unrest there because they want the conclusion to be that ICE pulls out and that they've won. And Tim Walz is doing that to distract from all of the fraud that happened in his state that led him to withdraw from the governor's race. I truly do not understand what the Trump administration is doing here. They're losing a PR battle in a bloodbath.
Now, the law enforcement community, they're the last community on earth that wants an officer-involved shooting. I don't know that they've been well represented in the media. Do you think they have been?
No, absolutely not. I have friends whose husbands are law enforcement and they're ripping their hair out. This is such a hard job. These officers have been put in such a difficult position. One of the most underreported things about this entire situation is how organized these people are. They have a database of suspected ICE vehicles, and a lot of them are journalists, actually. They're riding around in black cars that look like ICE, and they're reporting that they're being followed, that they're being harassed. It is just a real chaos bubbling under the surface all the time. And honestly, it's a miracle that it's only resulted in 2 deaths. But this is ultimately what Democrats want. They want people to martyr themselves for this cause.
Radical Democrats. I'm not going to paint Josh Shapiro with that brush, but I do think Tim Walz and Jacob Frey have a lot to
Minnesota
to answer for here. So my last question is, do you retreat if you're President Trump? Do you order the troops out and the ICE out and hope it all calms down? Or can you afford to do that because that is a victory for radicals who are organized and are operating to interfere with and create these kinds of incidents? The hard left in this country is back like it was with the SDS, and I don't know that you can retreat now. I was all in favor of declaring victory and going home last week. Now I don't know that they can.
Yeah, no, they need to stop with the rhetoric of, the people that were killed were domestic terrorists and all that stuff. That needs to stop. They need to have really clear, coherent, empathetic messaging, but also very clear messaging. And Kristi Noem needs to stop talking. Stephen Miller needs to stop talking. Even J.D. Vance, honestly, needs to stop talking. We need President Trump to stand up there front and center and say, these are the people we're arresting. This is how we're trying to do these arrests. And this is how they're trying to stymie us. This is how they're obstructing federal law enforcement. And it's illegal and it needs to stop. I think they cannot pull out because then this sends a message that if you get enough unfortunate, empathetic people to martyr themselves, then you've achieved a victory against President Trump. That is a very dangerous precedent.
Do you think Secretary Noem can recover? Because she has been awful.
Yes, truly awful. When you see people like Eric Erickson and Dana Lash and Cam Edwards, who, like, all of these folks are Second Amendment people, when they come out forcefully, and by the way, this is the difference between our side and their side. We're able to have, an honest conversation about, good tactics and bad tactics, and we're able to go after, quote unquote, our own side. And the statements that people were making in the wake of this, that it was a justified shooting because he was in possession of a legal firearm, is wild to me.
It is really dumb. Really dumb. And I don't understand how anyone can say that, especially after years of teaching the Second Amendment. Bethany, thank you. I'll be right back, America. TheMomWars.substack.com for Bethany Mandel, who's Bethany Shondark on next. One of the things I like to do, other people do this as well, but I like to dive deep when national security is involved and Iran and our potential going to war with them is very much on my mind. And so Benham Ben Taleblu is one of the half dozen actual, honest-to-gosh experts. And I've had on Mike Duran, and I've had on Mark Dubowitz. I will track down Kareem Sajapur, and I will find anyone who actually knows what they're talking about Iran and bring them on. And I've had Habib Reddy-Gore, of course, and Amit Segal and Nadav Eyal. And I got to get Dan Senor on. Dan's got a great, a wonderful podcast today. In fact, I did not know about the conflict between MBZ and MBS. And MBZ's been our little Sparta ally forever. I don't know what the president's doing about that, but I want to get into it, so stay tuned. We're going to go deep with Ben Talabou. Follow him on X at The Real Behnam, Behnam BT. All right? At The Real Behnam BT. I'm in the Relief Factor studio west. I have a Relief Factor studio up north, which is probably frozen. The door is probably frozen shut since it's closed for the winter. And I got a Relief Factor studio inside the Beltway, and I don't know what's going on there either. I'm in California, and I'm not going back east anytime soon. And there are days that you're very glad that you're in California for a couple of weeks, and this is one of them. Sad day on Saturday, but a wonderful day. Linda Bud Threen, Bud the contractor's wife, went to be with the Lord. We had a great memorial service. But I didn't get my double-digit miles in. I just went up the Implacable Hill and down the other side and back up and down with Jim Sweet from Philly, and didn't even think twice about it. I got to take some of this home for Jim. Although Jim is fine. He's not normally a billy goat. He's not normally doing hills, but he's just fine. He did another 3 with me this morning, and he probably doesn't need Relief Factor, but everyone needs Relief Factor. Carrying curcumin, resveratrol, omega. 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief. 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief. Or go to their website, relieffactor.com. Find the starter pack, $19.95, 3-week supply. It's less than $1 a day. Now, everyone who exercises or does something unusual, and especially people who are shoveling snow, I've only heard about 24 inches in the snow belt in PA. That's not really a big storm. It's not like the blizzard of 78 in Boston. But if you're shoveling snow, you're using muscle you've never used before, this is the perfect time to try Relief Factor. 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief. Or go to their website and find the starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day. But if you're out there and if you fall down, just be very careful. I know from my kids in Virginia that some people had sleet, some people had ice, some people had snow. But up north, it's just everything, and it's really cold. So just be careful on the roads and go about your day and stay inside if you can. No need to go out there until a couple of days of de-icing is underway. As I've said throughout the show today, I think we're on the brink of a strike on Iran. But I don't know anything. I just read people who know things. One of whom is Behnam Ben Talabou. Did I get it right? Behnam, because it's one of those names that always was going to trip me up forever. Did I get it right?
Not to worry. Great to be with you, Hugh. Yes, pretty close.
Great. We got time, so I want to do a deep dive for the benefit of the audience where we've got lots of cameras in Minnesota, and appropriately so, but not enough people are following with great specificity what has transpired in the aftermath of a massacre that is really without precedent in post-war World War II. Do you agree with me on that? It's bigger than Tiananmen Square.
Yes, unfortunately, the reported estimates we keep getting keep growing. Now, 30 to 36,000 is a reported estimate. Yes, in terms of confirmed people, places, names, faces, it's about 5,000 to 6,000, depending on the human rights organization you choose. But those human rights organizations are steadily and busily looking from 17 to 19,000 other cases right now. So if you take a bottom of the barrel assessment here, it's 20 to 30,000 plus. And again, this is not just yours truly as a member of the Iranian diaspora saying this. This is CBS News. This is Iran International. This is Time Magazine. This is Times of London. Everyone is coming to the same conclusion because they're looking at the same internal sources.
And I'm going to come back and establish why people should listen very closely to you after I get the quick update. Are executions underway despite Donald Trump's red line?
If you look at what's going on in Persian language social media, yes, indeed. And again, you don't have to take it from me. You can take it from Iranian officials, including someone from the judiciary who mocked President Trump for believing that, someone who also similarly mocked President Trump for believing that there was a stay of execution or a pause of executions, or even just a kind of an about face on the repression altogether, was a former advisor to the Supreme Leader, Mr. Larijani. These guys are like the brothers, or the Kennedy family brothers, popularly called in Iran. And this brother, Mohammad Javad Larijani, in a recent Persian language talk show, had actually mocked again the president for believing that there were these pauses or stays of execution given.
Well, this is why I want the audience to understand. The reason I think a strike is imminent is because the Iranian officials have been taunting President Trump. Half of them have been, including the Ayatollah Khamenei and his sort of thugs. And then the other half of the Iranian regime tries to talk nice to us through Mr. Witkoff. And we'll talk with Benham about that in a moment. But let's start by establishing who you are. It's the first time on the show, so I've got to ask you, was Al-Jarreas a communist spy, Benham?
First time caller, long time listener. I'm a big fan of Nixon history and paraphernalia. So I do believe he was, yes.
And have you read The Looming Tower?
I have actually, this is a controversial point in the office. I have actually only skimmed The Looming Tower and stayed away from the documentaries because with some of our other colleagues, there's a line I'm infamous for, given that I focus on Iran and the axis of resistance in the office, which is sometimes I find Sunni terrorism not as interesting as Shia terrorism.
Well, that was actually, I understand it completely.
So forgive me for, but I'm a New Yorker as well. So I mean, 9/11 hits home very hard.
I actually am very glad you made the key distinction. Al Qaeda is Sunni Wahhabist extremism, Islamist fanaticism. And what's going on in Iran is the Shia fanaticism. And so tell us your background on Iran, Benham, so the audience can understand you are not talking out of your hat.
Well, I try not to anyway, but I'm a first-generation Iranian American born and raised in the United States to two immigrant parents. On my mother's side, her father was a political prisoner at the heyday of the revolution. He was a reporter under the previous government, taken to Evin prison. Thankfully, he got out, but after he got out, the whole family fled. And I wouldn't say that cast an overcast or a shadow over my future and my career, but as I was interested growing up as a first-generation Iranian American about these issues, seeing that the Iran I knew at home and with family and with friends being drastically different than the Iran I saw in the 90s and 2000s, and again in the heyday of the global war on terror and post 9/11 Middle East. But about 19 years I've spent in Washington, D.C., all working on open source stuff, and 13 years at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where I've been intimately involved in their Iran program. And I'm the senior director of their Iran program now, where I oversee the breadth and depth of a lot of their work on Iran. And I've had the privilege over these 13 years to be invited to 4 different continents to brief media, government, military, academic audiences around the world on the Iran issue.
So I only try and bring on people who are serious. Mr. Ostavar, Richard Goldberg is on tomorrow. Your colleague Mark Dubowitz has been on this program, Clifford May. I try and bring on people that know what they're speaking about. I got to ask you, though, I've been listening to the book King of Kings by Scott Anderson. How do you rate it as a history of 1978-79 and the immediate thereafter?
Well, I eagerly bought it because, history is kind of what animates us in the policy space. If we don't know history, we're not going to know what we're talking about today. I recommend buying the book. I have some major qualms with the way the book goes through the lives of certain individuals, particularly some folks at the State Department at the time. It kind of uses their personal story to tell a story of the Iranian Revolution. I don't think that's always the best prism to tell history through. I think if you're doing history as biography, you're better off focusing on the biographies of people in the Middle East, because they've really made and reshaped their states. Focusing on a bureaucrat at the State Department to understand something as seismic as the Iranian Revolution is not always the best tool. So I think it's an important book to have. It is certainly by no means the only book to have on that revolution. I would recommend 2 good books on 20th century Iran: The Last Shah by Ray Taqiyeh, as well as, of course, Days of God by James Buchan.
Okay, what do you make of Vanguard of the Imam by Mr. Ostavar?
I've actually done a book review of Vanguard of the Imam. It's actually the nicest, best synthesis of the IRGC, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, out there from the academic world and in terms of the policy world. There are some people that I know and respect and work with that have talked about the Guard Corps, this kind of tip of the revolutionary spear of the Islamic Republic, as being able to create a military dictatorship overnight. And then there's some people who talk about it purely within the Islamic or Islamist lens. Ostafar does a nice balance in between. So Vanguard of the Imam is a good book if you want to understand the origins and the evolution of the IRGC.
Now, I have been following a few people very closely. Kareem Sajapur, whom I'm honored to know. I'm sure you respect his work. He's at Carnegie.
Absolutely.
Am I right that you respect
Absolutely,
Kareem?
yes.
And I've
Yeah,
been
he's
following
fantastic.
you and Mark Dubovitz and other people. I don't know what to trust when people say, here's Persian language media and I'm translating it for you, because you can't believe everything. Have you seen a lot of misinformation on the web in the recent weeks?
Well, it depends a great deal what you're looking at. There is a lot of narrative-based misinformation. You know, Iran's octogenarian supreme leader, so-called supreme leader, as President Trump likes to say, believes that sometimes more important than the kinetic war is winning the narrative war. You know, these are people who actually believe what they're talking about, and they're trying to make you believe what they're talking about as well. So they have spent considerable time, effort, attention, money to try to sow discord on social media, to try to sow discord within the Iranian opposition, to try to sow discord everywhere. And you know, you don't have to take that just from me. You can even look at the way the Biden administration's director of national intelligence talked about the way they even tried to penetrate and even fund and fuel many of the pro-Palestine protests here. So you are precisely right to talk about the challenge and the kaleidoscope of the information environment. And to make it even harder to understand, not only is this regime putting out disinformation and misinformation, calling Iranian protesters who are unarmed terrorists, saying people who were killed were actually regime loyalists and forcing their families into forced confessions, and all of this other atrocious stuff that has really turned the street against the state for many years now inside Iran. But then they also had this 2+ week internet blackout for fear of having been seen as transgressing Trump's red line on this crackdown.
So, Behnam, have you at the foundation or a group of people put forward for journalists like me who want to follow credible experts a comprehensive list of people that I try and do it occasionally. I'm always mentioning you and Mark and Kareem and Richard and Yashar, who I disagree with, but I think he does a good job reporting on Iran. We have 1 minute. If I missed somebody other than Clifford May, of course, but have I missed anyone I should be following? Absolutely.
I think you hit some of the greats. It's an honor to be included among them. I personally don't believe it's my view as a think tanker in Washington to name some and not name others. But I think folks who are in the media space like you, who have found credible and reliable voices, when you amplify it, A, we're grateful, and B, the American people are grateful. So kudos to you for doing that.
When we come back from break, I'm going to ask Behnam to walk us through the situation as he understands it. Monday midday drive time inside the Beltway, a snowed-in Beltway. But from all the sources I see inside the United States and from Israel, which I trust on this file, people like Amit Segal and Nadav Eyal and others, will get his take on where we are on this Monday. Behnam Ben Taleblu is a Iranian, first-generation Iranian American and an expert on the Islamic Republic of Iran. So Behnam is joining me for most of this hour, not the last 3 minutes when we transition to Larry Elder, but most of this hour, in order to talk about where we are. So I want to give you the floor. This is a 9-minute segment. Behnam, where are we right now in your estimate, and what do you see happening in the hours, days, weeks ahead?
We're at a critical juncture, not just in the long battle, the 47-year battle between the street and the state inside Iran, but we're also at a critical juncture in U.S.-Iran relations. Never has military force been threatened so overtly and credibly, I might add, in this way. So I think right now we're at the countdown to a highly likely strike, overt kinetic strike by the Trump administration against the Islamic Republic of Iran, with many questions lingering about the targets, about the relationship between the strike and protests, about how to counter the regime's potential retaliation, and perhaps most importantly, how a strike politically and from a policy perspective feeds into what the president had already wanted to achieve with respect to Iran.
So there are a lot of options on the table. I've heard a lot of people talk about impediments. In the Israeli media, they mentioned that Turkey has reinstalled radar in Damascus, which may be an impediment to the IDF working with us. That might not matter to our stealth fighters coming off the Lincoln or from the air bases. What is your assessment of the Israeli-American coordination level and whether or not an American strike would be joint or prior to an Israeli strike?
It's actually an excellent question because If past this prologue, the coordination that exists, not just at the military level, but at the political and intelligence level between Israel and the United States, and in particular between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government in Israel is quite extensive. I mean, quite literally, they were able to dupe and fake and bob and weave over the past, few months in 2025 prior to the 12-day war, with many credible journalists and experts left guessing as to the different sides of, the Iran issue. These two countries and administrations came down on, only to see that they were singing from the same sheet of music once the actual kinetic activity started with the 12-day war. So ultimately, I actually think there's a lot more that is going on behind the scenes. I think in terms of order, you raise a very interesting question. Is it America first, then Israel, or is it Israel first, then America? And in terms of the targeting, if there is going to be something kinetic, and again, it highly looks like that, will there be a division of labor? Last time the Israelis cleared the way for America to have a powerful strike against the nuclear program. This time, of course, you have to worry about how can you suppress the regime's lethal ballistic missile force, anti-access area denial capabilities, while being able to hold the political and security elite responsible for the crackdown against the state. So one wonders right now, is there a division of labor? And if past is prologue, I highly think there is.
So, Behnam, I've asked everyone about this. There are only three oil exporting terminals in Iran. One is on Karg Island. There are two other ones adjacent. That is the lifeblood of the IRGC. That is the currency upon which their terror network operates, and they pay their people. Even it's hard currency through shadow companies. Why don't we hit them if we go in?
So I think thus far the U.S. has been a bit reticent to escalate en masse against energy. One reason has been energy prices. The other reason has been the Iranians might go full force against GCC energy infrastructure, which, again, if passes prologue, the regime would try to.
That would be the Gulf Coordinating Council. You now have $5 in the tip jar. A rule of the Hugh Hewitt show that former Congressman Mike Gallagher would break. No acronyms without explanation.
No acronyms.
Okay. So it's the Gulf Coordinating Council. Yeah.
Yes. So it's America's Arab partners on the other side of the Persian Gulf, places where we have a lot of bases. But you remember in 2019, there was a drone and cruise missile attack by the regime against Saudi oil facilities. It's assumed that it could engage in a much larger, much wider operation, really from the mid-Obama period, 2010, 2012, when there was the talk of oil sanctions being floated in Washington and then enforced over time. Iran had talked about responding in kind against energy infrastructure. So, there's a desire not to spook or provoke the Islamic Republic into doing that. But then again, at this point in time, when the regime is so weak, when the regime basically has no air defenses, when it's come up short against American and Israeli conventional military capability, when its nuclear program is down, when its proxies have been neutered, the question is, if Iran does respond to a U.S. attack against Karg Island, for example, just hypothetically, it would be leading with its chin, because it would literally try to attack civilian infrastructure on the other side of the Persian Gulf, and in so doing, bring Uncle Sam in a much, much bigger way. So potentially the Islamic Republic is threatening damage that it can't win an escalation spiral with respect to. So those are options that remain on the table. I don't think the U.S. might start with that, but those are options that remain on the table. And perhaps the U.S. could credibly wield that as a tool to get Khamenei to take this punishment, or even decapitate the Khamenei-led government there as a way to bargain against responding.
Ben, I don't want to be overconfident, but I was in the Reagan administration when Operation Praying Mantis happened, and President Reagan ordered half or two-thirds of the Iranian Navy sunk, and it was. And they didn't put a glove on us. I don't recall that they did. Maybe they did have one destroyer strike. I'm not really worried if we go all in about their ability, other than for Israel. I mean, they could fusillade Israel with every launcher they've got left and try and overwhelm Iron Dome. What is your greatest concern? Because the oil money keeps that regime alive. There's no way it survives 3 years without the oil money.
Precisely. Going after Karg Island and Asaluya would basically be a death blow to the regime's economy, and it would be expediting the ticking time bomb that is already the poor economy of the Islamic Republic. That being said, I think there have been updated plans, if I had to guess, from the Department of War now with respect to Operation Praying Mantis, how not just to go after the conventional Iranian Navy, but the much more smaller and more greatly dispersed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, which uses fast attack craft, underwater drones, anti-ship cruise missiles. So the U.S. has the opportunity to defeat this if it operates from range, if it is willing to take a few hits and then land a few major blows. But ultimately, I think you're right when it comes to the balance that past this prologue, if the U.S. chooses to come in a big way, it can actually decisively tip the balance and neuter the forces in the Persian Gulf. It could be messier now, however, which gets me to what my fear is per your question. The regime will be able to land blows against critical energy infrastructure or even American bases, given the distance and given that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps now, compared to the 1980s, has precision strike short-range ballistic missiles, many of which were not used actually in either the 12-day war or the April and October military exchanges between Iran and Israel. So the threat is the precision strike threat across the Persian Gulf. And second, of course, American basing and infrastructure. So not just energy and civilian targets there, but basing and infrastructure. And third, exactly what you mentioned, which is resuming their medium-range ballistic missile strikes against Israel, hoping to puncture through Israel's layered air and missile defenses.
When we come back from break, I will ask Benham whether or not, in his assessment, the IRGC poses a threat to the Lincoln or any of its strike group escorts or other American naval assets, and what kind of threat it poses to our airmen in Qatar and our other facilities among the Gulf allies that we have, and to MBZ, who's been our staunchest, strongest ally other than Israel for many, many years in the Middle East, and MBS, who's the up-and-coming dominant power in the region. My guest from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is that foundation's head of the Iran program there, Benham Ben Taleblu, who you can follow, the real Benham Ben, on X, and I will be reposting that in this interview over at my YouTube channel if you want to send it to your friends. Benham, based on your extensive contacts, give me what you believe is the scenario that will unfold within, and even your time frames, because we can't keep a carrier off the coast of Iran forever, and the Lincoln's been out for a while anyway.
Well, the first thing I would say is never underestimate the ability of the United States to spend money. There have been times we've had two carriers in the Persian Gulf. Obviously, it was a very different regional threat environment in the CENTCOM AOR, in the CENTCOM area of responsibility, I should say. Sorry, another tip, $5 in the tip jar. But so never say never when it comes to Uncle Sam being able to spend money, to build leverage, to generate deterrence by simply amassing these forces and being able to politically and militarily strangle the Islamic Republic. But that being said, I do think we're in the countdown period to a strike. The real question is what kind of strike? And this is actually where decision makers in Washington are much more tight-lipped than ever before. Trump term 2 is very different than Trump term 1 in that respect, just as an observer and someone who lives here. But I will tell you this, the president is keeping the cards close to his chest. I think the mistake during Trump term 1 is we would focus on the people around him, who's up, who's down, the Kremlinology of the situation. The president, the commander-in-chief, is absolutely 100% in charge. And the reason we don't have a strategy set yet, or we haven't had much insight yet, is that the president is choosing not to reveal this. And again, he could be building up to a situation like we had in last summer in 2025, where he feigns in one direction and goes in another. But I think we have to understand that more than any other president, President Trump covets flexibility and actually creates uncertainty and doubt, both in the minds of allies and adversaries alike, for his and the U.S. strategic benefits. So that's one reason why we're all still in this guessing game and holding pattern as the U.S. continues to move more assets in theater. I think at a very minimum, if we're going to ascribe something to what the president is interested in doing, it is, to borrow a line from Machiavelli's The Prince, it is to satisfy and stupefy, to be able to satisfy the constituencies that want a strike and to hold up that U.S. credibility, that U.S. red line, to look more like Reagan on Iran than Obama on Iran. And then more importantly, to stupefy, to make sure that that credibility transcends just the Iran paradigm, to keep the ball rolling, if you will, when it comes to U.S. military wins following Venezuela, following Operation Midnight Hammer, rather than having this be a critical juncture where U.S. credibility and capability is doubted, despite the successes, at least with the regime change at the top in Venezuela, and at least with the counterproliferation operation that was Operation Midnight Hammer. So the president is looking, I think, to satisfy and stupefy.
Benham, my worry about attempting to take out Ayatollah Khamenei is that it's pretty easy to hide one person. You can't hide an oil terminal or their Navy or IRGC bases. But in order to increase the deterrent that the president has painstakingly rebuilt since the collapse in Afghanistan under President Biden, to increase that deterrent, he's got to do something visible. I mean, something dramatic. That's my opinion, and that I think he will dent the deterrence he's rebuilt if he doesn't do something visible and dramatic. Do you agree with me?
I agree wholeheartedly. This needs to not just be seen, to be credible and have an escalating and resonating deterrent effect and credibility multiplier for America's other authoritarian adversaries, not just in the region, but elsewhere. But most importantly, needs to be felt and seen by the Iranian people. Lest we forget, the reason we're in this situation is there has been nationwide anti-regime protests, the most significant protests in the history of the Islamic Republic, and the most violently repressed, not just in the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic, but in the past century, if not century and a half, of contemporary Iranian history. And the president chose not once or twice, but based on whatever open source you're looking at, print, TV, radio, social media, 8 to 9 times has touched this issue, has made it a U.S. issue by talking about holding the regime accountable. And therefore, this is intertwined with a credibility issue and a deterrence issue for Washington. But I would push even further. I agree with the line that is often ascribed to Henry Kissinger, that foreign policy is not missionary work. It is not charity to strike the government of the Islamic Republic just because we're standing with the Iranian people. This is a regime that has chanted since its inception, death to America and death to Israel, and has put its money where its mouth is for those 4.5 decades.
Okay, so I'm coming back for one more segment with Ben Talablu. And when we do, we got to find out about the threat to the Lincoln, other adjacent ships, Israel, and whether or not Iran's terror proxies are inside the United States. Because indeed, if we hit them hard enough, they'll do everything they can to hurt us. And I want people to be very wide-eyed and awake about those risks. Benham, General Mattis, when he was in charge of an expeditionary unit out here in Camp Pendleton, had a chief of staff, Clark Lethane, who once said, I wish you civilians would think about second-order impacts. Well, I am thinking about second-order impact. Can they hit the Lincoln? Can they hit our ships? Can they hit Israel? And do they have sleeper cells in the United States? That's a lot of questions. You have the floor.
It's a lot of questions, but I'll do my best to answer. Certainly, they can strike U.S. bases on the opposite side of the Persian Gulf. At the end of the 12-day war, we saw the regime fire ballistic missiles at a actual radome facility at the Al Udeid base in Qatar. So there's a demonstrated ability to do that. We also know that there's the IRGC Navy threat, the anti-access area denial, and the maritime asymmetric threat in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, which can go from anything from mining operations, placing limpet mines, selective anti-ship missile attacks, underwater drone attacks, and harassment operations that could make life much more challenging, but certainly not impossible, either for the Lincoln or for our destroyers. And we need those destroyers in that region to bolster air and missile defense, because these are Aegis-enabled ballistic missile defense destroyers as well. But if the U.S. chooses to operate from range, which is one way you can get around anti-access area denial capabilities, or if the U.S. punches the regime hard enough and suppresses their fire in a preemptive operation, then there's the chance that you can significantly reduce the zone of impact for the U.S. on the opposite side of the Persian Gulf and in those waters that you mentioned. Israel is an altogether different matter. Iran has 3 chains of missile bases that are underground caverns or underground missile bases. There's the western chain, the central chain, and the eastern chain that can fire medium-range ballistic missiles at Israel. If past is prologue, I think about 30 people died in the 12-day war. The regime fired about 570 plus medium-range ballistic missiles, and Israel had a 86% interception rate. So that's fairly high level of success. But make no mistake that it did a significant amount of damage and burnt through a bunch of U.S. and Israeli missile interceptors, which is one potential reason for the pause in the Middle East today. So certainly the regime is weak. Certainly, though, it can do damage despite being weak, but we still have the upper hand. It's about being willing to pay those costs up front or distributing them over time.
And what about Hezbollah in the United States?
Let me just say this, because the changing face of Iranian terrorism in the U.S. has to be taken seriously. I think for far too long, we've had a politicized border debate when this should be a nonpartisan debate. The fact that you have had not just Iranians, but a whole host of different nationalities be able to, for many years, come in through the southern border and be undocumented could pose one threat vector, but it's not the only threat vector. If you look at the past decade and a half, the Islamic Republic has tried to work with everything from Mexican drug cartels to Eastern European mafias to Canadian biker gangs to try to engage in kidnapping or terrorism or assassination on U.S. soil against dissidents, defectors, and even U.S. persons and citizens. So that should be setting off the alarm bell as well. The fact that also on the anniversary of the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the regime's former chief terrorist, which the Trump administration killed in January 2020, his replacement talked about, wouldn't it be nice if Americans were able to carry out our operations or our activities for us, having Americans fight Americans rather than, the Iranians pay a proxy or a gun for hire to kill Americans. So there is that fear of being able to ride the wave of lone wolf frustration that could exist in this country. And the third, of course, is the potential for those sleeper cells either in certain communities inside the United States or the ability to kind of work through a whole host of fronts or affiliates that may not even know they are fronts or affiliates. Again, this is something that former DNI Avril Haines in the Biden administration talked about when it came to the pro-Palestine protests, that they didn't even know where some of this direction and funding was coming from. So those fears exist. Fortunately, law enforcement plus national security has done a good enough job so far, but good enough is not good enough for government work in this case.
All right, so everyone's got to realize there are real risks to Americans and to Israelis and to our allies in the Gulf, especially UAE and Saudi Arabia. Let me close by asking you in terms of that Turkish radar in Syria. That's news to me this weekend. Is that a real problem? I mean, do the Turks get upset if we blow up their radar for Syria?
The question is, do we even need to blow it up? Is it something that the Israelis might do, or is it something that they may be able to work around? Turkey is no doubt trying to fast replace the Islamic Republic as the other Islamist-leaning power in Syria. I think this is a real challenge for the U.S. to be able to deconflict between, admittedly, a NATO member not in good standing, which is Erdogan's Turkey, and our major partner in the region, Israel, and to make sure that they don't come to blows over Syria. But, make no mistake, Israel has really post-October 7 punched through a lot of assumptions we have had about things that could limit their room for maneuver and freedom for military operations. So I would say here, never say never.
All right, my last question. I am not an optimist about regime change. I think this is 47 years of malignancy, and you can't cut that tumor out absent. But you can certainly stunt its growth and send it backwards. Are you an optimist about the regime collapsing?
Believe it or not, I'm a long-term optimist because there is no way out but through for Uncle Sam in the desert. There's no path out of the desert that does not include flipping the script on the Ayatollahs in Tehran. There is no way to pivot to China. There's no way to lock down the Western Hemisphere. There's no way to generate the credibility to deal with Putin or really anybody else if you come up short against the Ayatollahs. We have, with the exception of Israel right now, an important intersection in the Middle East. Again, this is not charity. This is not missionary work. This is strategy. We have fundamentally the most pro-American and the most pro-Israeli population in the heartland of the Muslim Middle East being ruled over and repressed by the most anti-American and the most anti-Israeli government in the heartland of the Middle East. And so long as this regime is in power, and so long as those ideologies are at the helm, a country with the amazing resources that Iran has will continue to force us back in to conflict after conflict when we are least prepared for it. So I see the stars aligning. There is really no way out but through here. And whether it's in this current round or in a potential future round, the Trump administration or a future U.S. administration, I think, is going to have to realize that this is, again, not charity. This is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. There is a world of difference between foreign imposed regime change and foreign supported regime change. And for, again, those strategies, those values, when they align, and you seldom get them to align in the Middle East, you take that shot.
Behnam, thank you so much for joining me. Follow him on X at @TheRealBehnam, BEHNAM, Ben, and it will pop up. And you ought to follow him, and the people that he follows you ought to follow. I hope you'll come back as we are on the edge of momentous events in the Middle East. Thank you. Behnam, don't go. Foundation for Defense of Democracy, FDD.org. Go and find more there. I hope that was very, very useful to you. I think we're right at the brink, and we won't know when it's starting until we see pictures from Trey Yingst or Lucas Tomlinson or someone over at Fox News, forward deployed, that it's begun. And if the president, I do believe if the president doesn't do anything by St. Patrick's Day, deterrence will take a big dent. Won't be gone, but it'll be a big dent. I am in the Relief Factor Studio West, so I want to remind you I took this in hour 1. I want to remind you in hour 3, and I did it now. I reminded you in hour 2 as well, that you don't have to feel the pain. Now, I did the Implacable Hill on Saturday with my friend Jim Sweet, and we went down the other side and back up, but it wasn't double-digit miles at Huntington Beach. We did the Implacable Hill together, and we were out again today. He's been in town for Bud the Contractor's lovely wife, Linda, passed away, and we had a fantastic memorial service. And Jim, I don't know how Jim put up with Bud the Contractor for years at Wheaton, but they did. And Linda's in heaven, and we were happy for that, and we celebrate. But I've been making him do his paces with me in the morning. He's just a Philadelphia white shoes lawyer. He's not really. Since he retired from Drinker, he has been at Westminster Theological Seminary. It's a wonderful house guest. I'll be out with him again tonight talking about this. But I should give Jim some relief factor because I've been making him mark. He's a golfer. Golfers think that's really exercise. It's like Dwayne on his scooter. It's not. You need to exercise. You need to feel it. But you won't feel it for long if you take your relief factor. Now, the starter pack is $19.95. That's less than $1 a day for 3 weeks. You take 3 of them per day for the first week, 2 packets a day for the second week. Then you're on the 1 packet a day every day, and you'll feel like I do. After a wonderfully long but celebratory weekend, saluting Linda and Bud and their lives together and their son and everybody, it was wonderful. But it's that kind of thing. Plus, I had to go see my friend Len. Love to go see my friend Len and Judy. Not feeling so good, so a lot of freeway time this weekend as well. So if you're stuck in the snow or you've been shoveling the snow and you know you're feeling it, relief factor. Especially Pennsylvania got, of course they did. I don't know what Warren did. I haven't talked to my brother yet. But they'll get 2 feet of snow and everybody else is just pretending to be a snowstorm. But if you're shoveling wet snow, you're going to hurt your back. You need Relief Factor, the all-natural supplement that gets rid of the minor aches and pains that plague you. So do not go another day without trying it. Do me a favor. Go today, right now. 1-800, the number 4 in the word relief. 1-800-4 in the word relief. I want to close with Scott Besant on This Week with Jonathan Karl, cut number 12.
For the Veterans Administration, and there's no evidence that he brandished thing whatsoever. In fact, it appears that he was disarmed before
he brought a gun. Have you ever gone to a protest, Jonathan?
I mean, we do have a Second Amendment in this country that...
Jonathan, have you ever gone to a protest?
I mean...
have you gone to a protest?
I mean, no, actually, as a reporter covering it.
Okay, I've been to a protest. Yeah. Guess what? I didn't bring a gun. I brought a billboard.
Okay, Secretary...
It's not a good defense, Mr. Treasury Secretary. I've said many times, Minnesota is an open and a concealed carry. You go to a protest with a gun. That's not a good defense. I want everyone to know that's not a good defense. More on both Iran and Minnesota tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.